The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this another beautiful Saturday afternoon in Southern California. I'm looking forward to today's show and looking forward to not having to talk about the politics, although we'll get into that a little bit, I'm sure, but not to the what is Trump doing in the hospital and stuff like that. So we'll skip all that. Although I will say I'm a little, the one thing is he got this cool new treatment, this Regeneron or something. It's an antibody treatment that he got at the White House a couple of days ago. And, wouldn't it be cool if anybody who actually wanted that treatment and the company that was willing to provide it could get it? Because this is an experimental treatment that has not been approved by the FDAC. And he got a compassionate use permit, especially for him. It's actually an exciting technology. I've been reading about it. I was reading about it before this was given. It's like they try to create the antibodies. So these are artificial antibodies that they create to fight the disease, and they get it off of plasma from survivors, and then they figure out what are the antibodies that are reacted, and then they try to mimic those. And a number of companies are working on this, and it's quite exciting. So anyway, we've got Onkar Ghate joining us today. He's the Chief Philosophy Officer at the Ayn Rand Institute. And we've got a few kind of non-controversial, simple topics to talk about.
Yeah, hi, Yaron.
Hey, Onkar. So, I was talking about JudgeBarret a week ago, whenever it was in the news. And of course, the issue of Roe versus Wade came up because, she is clearly a devout Catholic, although she insists that wouldn't affect her interpretation of the law. But she's devout. She's not just, there are a lot of Catholics out there, there are a lot of judges who are religious, but she kind of it made it very clear how devout she is, and her life story is one of seemingly of devotion to the Catholic Church. And the issue of abortion came up, and I'm always surprised by how many of my listeners either are anti-abortion or are confused about the issue. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to have you on and talk about it. And then another issue that is always kind of comes up is the issue of nihilism. What is it exactly? How do you identify a nihilist versus all the other evils out there? And so that I think that's going to be a really good topic as well. So let's, and of course they're two connected. So yeah, let's start out with abortion, but in a sense, to lead up to abortion, I think it's important to understand the concept of individual rights and what it is and when it applies. Because I think many people out there, particularly on this abortion issue, have the idea, an intrinsicist view of individual rights. It's somehow inherent in being human, it's somehow part of you as a human being. And I think, would that be true of kind of the Enlightenment view of rights? How did the Enlightenment view rights?
I don't think it's true of their view in essence, but it's true of their ultimate philosophical justification for rights. So I think you have to distinguish between what they're doing, the thrust of their arguments, and rights as a moral political concept. And they're crucially concerned with putting government on a proper foundation. So part of the Enlightenment project is when they're forming colonies and so on, writing new constitutions, new charters for these colonies going to North America. And so they're really thinking about this issue. And you see that in political philosophy with Hobbes versus Locke, and then forward into the Enlightenment. This is a major, major issue. And if you think what they're basically arguing for, it's individualism in politics. And in that sense, I don't think it's right to think of it, you put it as intrinsicist, that what they just view it as somehow it's written into reality that people have these rights. And then if you say it's written into reality, ultimately that's going to be God decided. He's written it in on stone tablets or in a more complex way. But the ultimate justification is this is what God's declared. And that you find in Locke, you find it in, or at least echoes of it in the Declaration of Independence, because we're created by our Creator. So there's this idea that the ultimate justification, you need to appeal to religion. But if you think of the essence of the argument, it's that you need, if we're to be concerned with our life, with survival, with prosperity, with the pursuit of happiness on this earth, we need freedom. And we need the freedom to think, we need the freedom to produce, we need the freedom to keep what we've produced, and we need the freedom to decide who we're going to trade with, who we're going to deal with, who we're going to live with, and who we're not, like who we're going to avoid. Yeah. So you need life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness, if you're to pursue happiness on this earth. And I think that's the thrust of their argument. But if you ask, well, how do you defend this philosophically? And isn't the pursuit of happiness wrong in the end philosophically? And aren't we supposed to live for the common good and look out for our fellow man and do what God has told us to do? And so philosophically, they can't justify the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. And so how do you justify rights if you can't justify the pursuit of happiness? And they have to go back to God.
Religion. Yep. So what's the proper view of rights and defending rights and the idea of where rights come from, in a sense?
So to say that so what you get in the Enlightenment, and crucial to the whole American experiment and the founding of the new country, is that rights precede government. Mm-hmm. And one way of asking, how can they precede government? And it's, because God's decided. It's not the governing body. It's not the government or the legislature that's decided. So it's who decides? And it's, God decides. But the real view, and again, this is part of in the Enlightenment, it's not the whole story, is what precedes it is morality. So what precedes politics? Well, morality and a view of right and wrong comes before how to organize politically and what is right or wrong political organization. You have to have a more fundamental view of what is right and wrong. And what you get in the Enlightenment is the pursuit of happiness is right. I mean, they're all the leading thinkers and if you just think of the American founders, Jefferson, Madison, Washington, they're really, really concerned with figuring out what is a prosperous, happy life. And that's what I want to live. And that's what I'm trying to build, whether on Mount Vernon or Monticello. This is what I'm trying to create. And so I think in their individual lives and their individual orientation, this is what we're after. And you see this clearly in Locke, that it's who are the good people. One of his formulations, it's the rational and the industrious. Yep. It's the thinkers and the producers.
Yep.
Yeah, they're the good people, and we need a society that's geared to them. And that's what the idea of rights is. It's one way Ayn Rand put it, but I think she thinks of this is what they were doing. It's you're subordinating politics to moral law. You have a moral vision of what's right and wrong, of who's good and who's evil, and then how do you create a political system that the good people flourish? That's the basic question.
So, the libertarians often talk about rights as you can do whatever you want to do as long as you don't hurt somebody else, as long as, the rights end at the tip, at the tip of your nose or something like that, right? But that is not Rand's view. And based on what you just said, it's not Locke's view. It's not really the Enlightenment view at all.
And it's not the founders' view. Like they would not have pledged their fortunes and their sacred honor for the right to sit on the couch and smoke weed. Like that, it's no possibility that could happen. They're after a positive. They want something that they think that the British crown is making more and more impossible. They want to lead a certain kind of positive life where they can think for themselves, they can build huge estates. Like it's often taken as a criticism. It's, these were property owners trying to protect their property. That's a major virtue. that they wanted to protect the right to property for themselves and other people. So it's a major positive orientation, not it's I can do what I want, don't trespass on me or something like that. That's a consequence. It's these are the positives I want to pursue, so you can't trespass on this area. But it's a consequence, not the primary.
So it's the fact that libertarians don't want to commit to morality. They don't want to commit to a particular view of morality that leads them to, well, it's the system that protects us to do whatever we want to do. It's a subjectivism.
They don't want to take a moral stand, and you can say even deeper, they want to be agnostic. They want to say any morality leads to rights. I mean, this was the kind of Rothbard view, and it's insane. I mean, really, if you know about the history of thought, not every morality and every view about what is right leads to what we need are the rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, it's literally crazy to think that any morality will lead you to a system of rights and freedom.
And the founders had a view of what the pursuit of happiness required. It again wasn't a completely subjective view of do whatever you want to do or whatever you feel like doing. Will lead to happiness.
And you can take as a symbol here someone like Benjamin Franklin, who has a view about like these are virtues you have to practice if you're going to lead a prosperous, happy life, and these are all kinds of vices, and government can't prescribe these. But the idea that they didn't have a view that certain courses of action are virtuous and others are vicious. So some things you're doing are right, some things you're doing are wrong. They have views about that. The government can't enforce those things. But the idea that it's the whole political project is value neutral is completely wrong.
Yep. So how does this view of right then connect to the issue of abortion? Why is it that a fetus doesn't have rights?
I think before we turn to that question, we should get another issue on the table, but particularly if we're going to get the objectivist approach here, and it relates to the pursuit of happiness, because there's a way in which all the discussions of abortion are, we want to either prevent it, outlaw it, or regulate it almost out of existence. And it's like that's taken as that's the moral position. And now defend why you should be able to abort in this context or this section. And it's, oh, well, the life of the mother is threatened or it was rape. And I think that's completely the wrong way to look at it. And if we connect it to the issue of the pursuit of happiness, part of the whole Enlightenment project, and I think this is one of the central aspects that Rand respects, admires, and builds on. She often quotes the Francis Bacon, nature to be commanded must be obeyed. And that what you get in the Enlightenment is this, we're going to transform the world. You have to do, you're not given values, you have to create them, and you have to do a massive transformation, and you have to take control of your life. And it's easy to think in the 21st century that human beings always had control over the realms of sex and procreation.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you know anything about history, it is just not true. It's a massive achievement. I think one of the greatest inventions in the 20th century is birth control more widely, and the pill more specifically. But if you're looking at it from the context that sex is an enormous value, it's experienced as an end in itself, as something you do for its own sake. And the threat of, well, you might get pregnant, it might lead to kids that we don't want. So that's always been a problem. And that you have kids when you don't want, or you have too many kids, or even that you're having trouble conceiving. And it's just, that's sort of your fate in life. The control we now have over procreation, and then so the ability to engage in sex as an end in itself without any kind of worry or threat, that is such an enormous achievement, an enormous value that human beings pre the 19th, 20th century never enjoyed. And that's so there's a real positive of having that kind of control over your life, of deciding if you want kids, when you want them, how many kids you want, and that birth control, abortion, all these things are aspects of having this kind of control. So there's a real positive here. So it's not, I'm pro-abortion in the sense I'm pro people having this kind of control over their life, and then being able to enjoy a sex life as an end in itself. And so when there's laws being proposed or passed that interfere with this freedom, I view it as an enormous negative. Not there's something sort of embarrassing here that you have to defend because it's like hardcore pornography. Ayn Rand said, yeah, I'm for free speech. I'm going to defend this, but I'm not. I don't watch hardcore pornography. And so abortion is not at all like that. And that's the context, I think, to think then of like, why is this part of a woman's freedom, and why is a fetus doesn't have rights?
And I find it interesting that a lot of times, at least in my chat, a lot of times when you talk about abortion, it does boil down to this, this promiscuous sex, and people who have promiscuous sex get pregnant, they should suffer the consequences of their actions. And there is this very, I think at the end of the day, Christian view of sex and what sex entails and what sex is okay and what sex is not, that permeates the abortion debate. It's not just about, it's not maybe even at all about the fetus. It's what really bugs them is the freedom to have sex and not to worry about it, and that there are remedies to if something something happens that is negative, like a unwanted pregnancy.
Yeah, and I view it's in the opposite, in the sense of, instead of saying, okay, the condom didn't work, or what, the contraception didn't work, and you want to have an abortion, now rather than saying, okay, you have to now live with your decision, this is taking responsibility of someone thinking, or a couple thinking, no, we're not ready for kids now, we're too young, or we're not in the right financial position, or we just don't want kids. They're taking responsibility, and that's what's being taken away from them if abortion is off the table. It's one form in which they take responsibility for their sex life and for whether they should have children or not. And the idea that you take that away from them, and in the name of personal responsibility, I think it's the opposite of the truth of what has happened.
Or in the name of the pursuit of happiness of a potential human being and not a real human being. So you're denying them choice, you're denying them responsibility, you're denying them the options in the name of something that's not yet real. And the anti-sex was new to me. I didn't realize the extent to which it goes, that there's this, they won't say it's anti-sex, they'll never admit that it's anti-sex, but their attitude towards it is, well, I mean, if you have sex, you should suffer the consequences if there's bad out. Really? I mean, that's a really weird attitude towards sex.
And it is, I mean, this was Ayn Rand's view of Christianity's emphasis on abortion, and more generally trying to outlaw contraception, saying the only form that's proper is the rhythm method. It's all put terror into sex, and so that it's not experienced as an end in itself. And if you take the Christian view seriously, that you don't really count, you're supposed to be on your knees, oriented towards God. So the sex is not that. Sex is an orientation towards yourself, towards your own life, happiness, pleasure. It's not a means to some other thing. But if that's the whole, morally, that's what you're supposed to do, you can see why they would be really, really anti-sex, because it's a major form in which you experience your life as an end in itself. And that's exactly what philosophically they're at war with.
Yeah, and even the Old Testament is filled with the idea that the purpose of sex is procreation. There's no purpose beyond that. It's procreation, and it's very anti even masturbation, because it's a waste. It's and at the end of the day, it's pleasure, and they're against that. So there's a whole line through religion, the so-called Judeo-Christian tradition, of being anti-sex, anti-pleasure, and creating. And I think what happens when you take away abortion is you create now a cloud over the sexual act of stress, of worry, and that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Yeah. So in that context, that there's an enormous positive here that's being attacked.
Yes.
I think then when you think of the issue of rights, and if you take seriously the whole view that rights, the fundamental right is a right to life, which means to your own life, to live it and to enjoy it. And the pursuit of happiness is emphasizing that it is for yourself here on earth, for your happiness, pleasure, enjoyment, fulfillment. And if you take that seriously, what the whole perspective is you have independent beings trying to figure out in a social organization, how can we make it an organization in which each of us can be pursuing our own happiness and yet still interact. And when we think it's profitable to interact with other people, we're able to do that. And when we think it's not, we're able to go our separate ways. But the whole perspective is you're dealing with individual, separate entities, each who should be, they might default on this and they might not put the effort or the thought into it, but who should be pursuing their own lives and happiness. And then rights are principles you formulate to say, okay, society has to respect everyone's life, their ability to think for themselves, to earn and keep the property they produce, and to pursue their own happiness. It's fundamentally, you're projecting adult human beings, figuring out how to interact socially in a way that would be at least possibly beneficial to all of them. That is, if they think about their lives and so on, everyone can pursue and enjoy their life and happiness. And when you're talking about a fetus, or even before a fetus, an embryo, you're not talking that there's nothing like an independent being that would be thinking about the pursuit of its life and happiness. It doesn't have a life yet. It is a part of, dependent on, biologically, physically, philosophically, you would say metaphysically, it's a dependent on the mother. And that it's not a separate being, and it doesn't have rights. It's more plausible to grant rights to animals that are independent things than it is to embryo.
So if rights are a way in which to deal with adults, pursuing their own happiness, free of coercion and allowed or left free to pursue their virtues. What about children? So why start rights at birth? Or why protect rights at birth, and why not protect rights at some measure of adulthood?
If you think about birth, so it's often put, I'm sure you've got this argument many times, like it's something arbitrary. Birth is, you're just like drawing an arbitrary.
What about a minute before birth?
Yeah, and it is not arbitrary. Birth is, and it's been for hundreds and thousands of years, marked as a major event.
Yeah,
because it is a major event. This is when it now when it is born and you cut the umbilical cord. You now have an independent functioning being. It's not an adult yet. It can't look after itself, but you have an independent being. And that's the sense in which children have a subordinate and derivative status. You're not organizing political society if everyone's children. You're doing it for adults, and the parents then become really custodians of the child's rights. There's a way in which they don't fully have rights yet. The parent has to exercise all kinds of decisions about what will happen to the child, where it will live, what it's fed, how it will be educated, and so on. It's the parents who are, and they have an obligation. I think once the child is born and is independent, they are then custodians in that sense. And what part of their responsibility is to bring the child into adulthood, maturity, so that it can exercise its own independent thinking, life, and it becomes then fully it has rights. And they're not exercised by the parents. And if the parents don't like what the child's doing, it doesn't matter anymore. I mean, it's an independent, fully functioning being. But you have to see it as it's a derivative. You can't start with everybody's a bunch of children and they have rights and so on. No, you would not have political society if we had a bunch of 5-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And you can see like we're descending into, we've got a bunch of 5-year-olds, and you don't have a political.
They're running the country. They're not just the people that are running it. So what birth does is it creates this individual, right? It separates. So what about, an hour before? Because I get this as a serious question. What about an hour before? Is it moral? And then separately, is it a violation of rights, which would make it illegal?
Yeah, I don't think it's a violation of rights. Rights begin at birth because now you have an independent entity. Is it moral would depend on the circumstances, what is happening, why you're aborting right before birth. Is it because there's a real threat to the mother? Is it because you've detected there's some real abnormality with the fetus, or what is it? And if it's completely capricious, obviously it's immoral, but there's all kinds of decisions people make if they do it completely capricious or immoral.
Yeah, capriciousness in and of itself is immoral. So this is just one instance of it, but it doesn't inform the debate much.
And just think, just in this context, how many things parents do to their kids that are immoral.
Yeah.
And the government can't come in and say that, look, the way you're educating this child is really bad. I mean, I think in essence, teaching a young child religion is immoral.
Yeah.
You should wait till he's an adult and can think about these issues and choose for himself, not inculcate some dogma into him. But I don't think the government can come in and stop people from teaching the child Christianity or Judaism or things like that. So there's all kinds of things that are immoral that are not illegal. And it's not something distinctive about some case of aborting a fetus.
So in what realm is the government responsible for the rights of the child, for protecting the rights of the child?
I think it's essentially, it's the physical well-being of the child. And so when there's physical abuse, that is, you can say that the parents are no longer acting as the custodian for the child, respecting its rights, bringing it into maturity and adulthood. They're preventing that, and they're actively preventing that through physical abuse. And the state or the government can step in at that point. You could make an argument, I think, that parents have a responsibility to develop the child mentally in a certain way as well. Not particular content, but if you really don't teach a child language, he doesn't learn to speak. I mean, it's pretty hard not to do that. Like you have
lock him up in a closet or something like that.
Yeah. So there's usually will be physical abuse
in
order to do this. Yeah. But if that level, I think you can make an argument that it's that's child abuse as well. So it's not about the particular content. It's just not developing the mind at all.
I think that's right. So let's see. So somebody says an hour before birth, the baby, it is distinct. It's a separate thing. It just happens to be tied by a cord.
But it's not just happens. That's.
I mean, to me, that's such a bizarre argument. Birth means something. The baby comes out. It now becomes separate. Before, it's in the mother, literally inside of her. It's not the same thing. You can't take it as so. And this is where I think there's this intrinsicism. It's so somebody else says, but it has a unique DNA. It from conception, the DNA is unique to it separate from the mother's DNA? Isn't it a separate entity?
Separate DNA doesn't make it a separate entity. A separate entity means it can function independently. It's not biologically parasitical on the mother. So, and this is true. I mean, it's not just about human biology. This is true about procreation for other species as well. It's at certain points in time, it is not yet independent. And this is why birth, it's not just human birth and all kinds of, when you watch animal shows and so on, it's a major event because now you have an independently functioning thing that is individuated. It's metaphysically distinct. And it's at a certain level, this is perceptual, that you've got separate things. And if the argument is, oh, well, they're not really separate and it's all, then at a certain point, it's just, you have to look and see, there's a difference between something that's a part of the thing, parasitical, dependent on it, and something that acts independently. And before birth, it's not independent in that sense.
And this whole argument about brain waves and there's some consciousness maybe going on, and it feels pain, which is like a singer argument. Morality starts with pain. None of that is relevant because it's still not a separated human being.
It's not relevant from the perspective of rights. I've read a little bit of this. I think the science is bogus from what I've seen, because it's all towards you already know the conclusion. We're trying to find ways to prevent abortions. And so here's some data that someone might fall for. Yeah. But the idea that this is established, I do not think is true. But even if it were, what it would mean is maybe they would change the procedure for the abortion. Maybe you give some painkiller or something like that before, if they really, really thought this. Yeah. And then there were evidence for this, but it would not change the morality of doing it. I think that if it is like, no, we're not ready to have children. We don't want children. We can't afford children. And it certainly doesn't affect it legally.
And almost nobody has abortions in the third trimester, right? Because if you're going through those calculations, do we want a child or not? You do that early, and there is a cost to the mother of having an abortion late. This is not an easy procedure on the mother. So the more you wait, the more difficult it is emotionally, physically, and in all kinds of. So it's almost always the case that a third trimester abortion has something to do with either the mother's health or something wrong with the fetus, and they're doing it that. And then I think abortion is a moral necessity, because to give birth to a human being who's not human, does not have the capacities of being human, or is going to be like the Zika babies. You remember the Zika where the baby came out deformed, and there was a whole. They were banning abortion. They wouldn't allow these women to abort, even though the child, once it was born, would be in pain its entire life. And I can't think of anything cooler than that.
Yeah. And that's so you've put it as there's an intrinsicism involved. That dresses it up philosophically, like and religion is a form of intrinsicism, but it's commandment, and sort of explicitly commandment. I think for the abortion issue, you have to think of it as it's been commanded that at conception, God says there's a soul now, and now it's your obligation and your duty to minister to this and foster it the whole time, no matter what it does to your life, to your happiness. These are your orders. This is what's commanded. And you're going to hell if you don't do it. And that is the root of it. And I mean, Ayn Rand said, and I think this is true, there's no such thing as love for an embryo. There just isn't. This thing that is not even remotely yet a human being. It's a potential that is like way far from actual. The idea that I've fallen in love with this, there is no such thing. So what it is no, I've been ordered that I have to do this, and I'm going to be punished if I don't do it. And if you don't do it, I'm going to be punished. That is, God said we all have to do this, and you're not doing your part, and so on. And that's the motivation for it.
And what's astounding is, I mean, there are lots of atheists on here who are taking the anti-abortion position, and they're arguing vehemently that they're not Christian and they're not driven by God. And yet so much of the modern world, the secular modern world, is shaped and driven by Christianity. Even the atheists, I mean, most of the atheists I know are Christians. Most of the Jews I know are Christians in their morality and their approach to life. They don't even know it because the ideas are so powerful and are being part of the culture in such a powerful way. It's sad. It's sad.
And it's this, so that we've had 2,000 years of Christianity inculcating sacrifice. It's important to get for the abortion issue. So Jesus on the cross is the elevation of sacrifice as the moral ideal. And part of what Christianity pushes is the unintelligibility of the sacrifice. So the more unintelligible it is, the better. So if you think I've got to sacrifice for my fellow man, and there's questions you can ask about that are like, if I've made money, why do I have to give it up for the guy who hasn't made any money? Like, well, what's he doing? Yep. And why shouldn't he be? And once he starts making money, then he has to give it up for other, like it doesn't seem to make any sense. But if you say, look, no, you've got to sacrifice for God's sake, which is Jesus is somehow redeeming he didn't do anything wrong, but he's somehow redeeming our sins in God's eye. Like, how does this work?
And he's God's son to boot, right? The whole thing
doesn't make any sense. All that you can figure out is, okay, he's suffering.
Yes.
Sacrificing. What does this accomplish? How does it accomplish anything? You can't figure it out. And so it becomes sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and if you think of abortion, no, there's nothing actual that's gaining anything. You're sacrificing because God's told you who benefit. There's nobody around to benefit. There might be a potential and a lot of people are losing. Like the woman or the couple doesn't want the child and has to bring it to term. It might endanger her health, but she has to do it. So the sacrifice is clear. That there's someone gaining from the sacrifice? No. And that's part of what, if you really get the way sacrifice has been pounded into us, it's the more unintelligible it is, the more, okay, I guess there must be some reason I've got to do this. Yeah. God works in mysterious ways.
So how do we differentiate between kind of our approach to a fetus and our approach to a human being in a coma, or somebody who's old and who is on Alzheimer's or senior, lost his ability to take care of himself? Why does such a person have rights?
Well, they have rights. They're, again, more similar to a child, that they have rights. They were adults and so on. They're no longer capable of exercising their, if you're really talking of advanced case of Alzheimer's, I've seen some where the person really can't function anymore. They're not able to exercise their rights anymore. And it's either you have someone now who steps in as, now I'm responsible for this person, and you're in effect treating them like a child. Mm-hmm. And I'll administer their financial affairs and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then I'm not wandering into other people's property or driving a car and threatening people. Like, I'm taking responsibility for this. And that is, yes, if you have someone who's doing that, then you have someone who's exercising it's a real issue if you don't have someone to do that. It's not just, okay, this person's free to go about and can do whatever they want. So they're no longer, when we're talking about an advanced case, they're no longer capable of rational action. And it is then, that's not the normal case about rights. But again, if you just think of them, there are these mysterious things implanted by God then like, did this thing go away? Isn't it still in him? So he's just like everybody else? And that's not true.
Yeah, and certainly somebody in a coma, that's not true. They if somebody is paying for them to be kept alive, then they're kept alive. But the fact is that if somebody stops paying, then yeah, the plug is, somebody says, would you pull the plug on all of them? Yeah, if nobody's paying and nobody, there's no right to sacrifice my life, my income, for them staying alive, right? And it requires somebody else's labor to stay alive.
And you're starting midstream that it's like, would you unplug? No, I mean, one of the reasons to have a living will and so on is to appoint people, if I'm in a car accident and a coma and so on, that someone can step in and make decisions for me and say, yes, he would want to be put on a respirator and see maybe for a month if he comes out of the coma or not. And you appoint someone in advance precisely because you can't exercise it if you're in a coma. And it's not like you start off on a machine, so on, and then would you unplug the person? It's how does he get on a machine? And, so, and that all has to be, you have to take responsibility for that. And if it doesn't, then there's nobody to do that. And you would die. I mean,
yep. All right, so we have a few questions. Adam asks, Onkar, could you comment on the insult to Homo sapiens that's implicit in saying it's a person from the moment of fertilization by chemistry, it has unique human DNA?
It has unique human DNA, but I don't know what is meant exactly as an insult to Homo sapiens, but it's an insult to actual human beings.
That's what you mean.
To say that an embryo you're just like an embryo. You're not just like an embryo. You're not even close to it. And this was one of the things that I think Ayn Rand found particularly shocking. And it tells you that there's a non-rational, mystical element in play. Nobody would equate a potential with an actual. Nobody would equate an embryo with an adult human being. And if you think of it in other areas, I mean, nobody equates, you've got some materials, metals and so on in the ground with a Corvette. Like it's the same thing. It's just, no, there's potential if an enormous process happens that you can convert all this into a functioning automobile. They're not the same thing. And to equate them as though, they're just the same. Like, you don't think of that in any situation except for here.
Every cell in my skin has my unique DNA, but you don't confuse if I scrape my skin, you don't think, oh my God, we've just murdered a part of you on. I mean, that would be bizarre. The fact that it has a unique DNA, okay, it doesn't add or detract from this discussion at all. Okay, we've got a bunch of questions. I don't quite understand this question, Frank. Frank put a lot of money onto the question, so he says maybe you understand. Doesn't adoption prove, in quote, this is a contract issue and not a rights issue? I guess I'm not sure what we're proving.
I'm not.
So maybe Frank, you can say a little bit more in the non-super chat. Just write something so I can just understand the context of the question.
I would say, I mean, this might be part of it, that because we talked a little bit about the responsibilities of a parent to a child. And when you're putting a child up for adoption, you're, as the mother or the parents, are sort of surrendering that responsibility. And I think in that context, adoption should be state supervised. That is, it has to be really clear that you've set it up, that you are now dispensing with this responsibility, but you've put the child in a situation in which there actually is someone else responsible for the child, and that person's willingly accepting this obligation now and undertaking this, and now they're the adoptive parents and they have the responsibilities as if they were the biological parents, and that has to be supervised and sanctioned by law.
Yes, because otherwise, all kinds of problems otherwise after the fact can happen. Let's see. So there's a number of questions. Jason, your question, and then Michael's question that are a little off topic, so I'm going to leave them for later, even though you did put a significant amount. I'm trying to look to see if Frank has given us, Frank Rockefeller, he says, arguing from rights is a little selective. It tends to ignore male rights, doctors' rights, perhaps. Still don't understand. I mean, I don't see how a man has any rights in this context. This is something that's in the woman. It's about her body. It's about her life. She gets to make that decision. I do think doctors here play a role, because I think, for example, in third trimester cases, most doctors won't perform them because they unless there's because there is an issue of the woman's health. There is an issue of complexity. There is an issue of a certain unpleasantness about the whole thing. And some doctors won't do it. So unless there's a real, and it's also an expertise where some doctors will do it, but only if, and there's a moral issue. Why did you wait until now? Right. Yeah. So I'm not sure yet if I still have a feeling I'm not capturing what you're trying to get to, Frank. All right. So Deborah asked, do you think there is also an element of misogyny or sexism, i.e. woman's proper role is to bear and raise kids, in the opposition to abortion?
Yes.
I do too.
And particularly if you think of it as it's not wholly, but essentially religious inspired. There's a religious view about what a woman's place is. And it's a subordinate place. It's the sort of, if human beings are supposed to be servants of God, women are supposed to be servants of men who are servants of God. But there's it's the subordinate place. And it's not only the Christian culture, religion that has this. A lot of religions give women second class, if at best, sort of place. And it's a form of controlling. I mean, to take this, that they have this control over their own lives, is a form of controlling them.
Their own sexuality, their own choices about sex, all of that is. Frank says the male is materially interested party. He's not. And this is why it's not about the material. It's not about the DNA. The male has, I mean, he might think he has because he might want a child and the woman doesn't, but he has no rights with regard to this. He has no legal standing with regard to this. Even if they're married, he has no legal standing. This is purely a woman's decision. Now, once the child is born, then both parents have a legal standing. But as long as it's part of the woman, it's only the woman's choice.
And this is true of all health issues. I mean, so if you're married and you get, stomach cancer, and you want to do you're male and you want to do some kind of treatment, or you don't want to undergo treatment, your wife can't come in and say, no, I'm saying you're doing this treatment and the doctors have to listen and so on. You're an individual. You might, if you're in a good relationship, consult with your spouse about these kinds of things. But the idea that your spouse makes the decisions is, or it has to be a joint decision about issues about your health, it's just not right.
Frank says he can be forced to pay for a decision. If that's the case, then the law is bad. I don't think he should be forced to pay for an abortion. So somebody asked, if 1 week after birth of a baby, the doctors tell you your baby has a birth defect that will make his life a living hell, do you have the right to end its life?
I think it depends what living hell actually means. But you're custodian of this child. And if it really is like this child's going to live a painful, horrific life, that you're refusing treatment for it, and so I think parents can do it. And it's obviously it's a horrifying predicament to be in, but somebody has to make that decision, and they have.
And it might be that you'd have to. I've never thought about this, but it might be that you'd have to go in front of a judge or have some arbiter to make, just to make it objective, to make it sure that you're not doing something ridiculous or premature, or or that the decision is really based on the condition of the child. But
and that's true, I think, of all euthanasia-assisted suicide. It has that this is the use of force. It is the ending of a life or the refusing of treatment and so on. And it has to be clear that it's legitimate to do this. It's not like the child threw a tantrum and now it's okay. We've had it with it. Like it. So yeah, all of this, all these kinds of things have to be legally administered.
Yeah,
and objectively so.
Let's see. Do you not agree with the constitutional grounds upon which Roe was decided? Was it a bad decision, even if abortion is moral?
Yeah, I think it has elements that make sense, and it has major elements that are really bad, and you can see as opening the door. And when you see subsequent Supreme Court decisions and reasoning, that Roe opened the door for this kind of thing. So it's often put as it's about a right to privacy, but the right to privacy was tied to what they call liberty rights. So, and it is, I think, properly, if you think a right to abortion is an aspect of liberty. It's an aspect, if you have freedom of thought, of speech, of association, of action, this is decisions about your health and then carrying through with those decisions is an aspect of the right to liberty. So in that sense, so this idea is like that they're pulling something out of some fantasy land to talk about a right to abortion. I don't think that's the right reading of Roe v. Wade. It could have been better in terms of how they defend that there is a right to an abortion. And I don't think you have to go through privacy. So I think that is a mistake, but it wasn't just like privacy in a vacuum. It was privacy tied to liberty. But there's in Roe v. Wade, the division into sort of three tiers. And when government, and it's put like this, when government has an interest in this, government doesn't have any interest in the first trimester, pre or after viability. And this is one of the really problematic things, that it's the tiers, it's before viability and after. And viability is dependent on the state of technology. And we're going to reach a state where I think from conception, you could have an artificial womb and develop. I mean, we're going to, at some point, human beings are going to have that technology, I think. So, and in that case, it would be then all the pre-viability goes away because now the technology is, and that's a complete mistake. The state has no interest in this, either in the health of the mother, like it's the state's obligation to somehow ensure the health of the mother. It has an obligation to protect the decisions the mother makes about her health, but not that they're trying to advance her health, or that it has an interest in potential life. It doesn't have an interest in potential life. So part of what I think is bad about Roe v. Wade is it sets up like there's these competing interests. And it's what the woman wants, and then there's potential life, and then what the state or government wants, and so on. And that's not at all the right way to look at it. And so that opens the door to, no, we think the state has more of an interest here in what's happening and what is going on and in potential life and so on. And that's not what it means to possess rights. The state doesn't have, it's not like I'm interested in how I live my life and the state is, and we're sort of competing with who gets to decide and make decisions about it. That's completely wrong.
And that comes, I mean, seems like there's a whole tradition in the Supreme Court of talking about that way about state, about rights, about the state's interest and the individual's interest, and as if those conflict, and it's dangerous in many respects.
Yeah. It's one of the major misconceptions or deliberate distortions of the American legal framework. So if you really understand what the founding fathers did, the government has only one interest, which is to protect your rights. It doesn't have any goals other than that.
Yep.
And the moment you introduce, no, it has, yeah, it's supposed to protect your rights, but it's also supposed to look after the common good, the public welfare, some other goal that sets up that now you haven't set up government to protect your rights. You've set up government to protect your rights and do a whole bunch of other things. And now these come into conflict. And so how do we balance them? And so all kinds of decisions about how do we balance.
Yep.
But the Declaration is not about how do we balance various things.
There's nothing, yeah. Let's see. Why not turn it around and challenge those who oppose abortion to explain how and why a woman loses her rights if she gets pregnant?
Well, that's true. That's what the argument should be. But if you think of how the what are considered sort of the pro-abortion forces, it's very libertarian in the way that we were earlier talking about. It's you have the right to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's not right. I mean, you don't have a right to choose murder. I can't go around. I don't like the way someone looked at me, so I gunned them down. I have the right to choose. So you can, to defend that it's the women's rights, you have to understand those rights in a positive sense, and you would have to defend it as she has a right to the pursuit of her own happiness, to live her life. Not she has a right to choose whatever she wants. No, she has a positive rights about life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. And a crucial, this is what we started off with, and I think this is why you have to start off with it. A crucial aspect of the pursuit of happiness is taking control of your sexual life and your reproduction and decisions about procreation. And you have to have this kind of control. And that's what restrictions on abortion are taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be about content, not about I've got a choice or not.
So Adam asks, should it be a legal principle that the government should treat abortion exactly like any other medical treatment?
Yeah. I mean, I have to think about all the whole range of other medical treatments, but it is a decision in that sense. It's private.
Yeah.
And this is why privacy comes in. It's you're thinking about what are the conditions in which I'll be happy, and all kinds of health decisions are like that. And you have to think, like, you've been diagnosed with cancer. Is it slow going? Should I treat it, or should I just try to live out? And older people face this kind of decision, like, what should I do in it? And in that sense, you have to think carefully about this. It's about the pursuit of your happiness, and abortion is another thing like that.
Let's see. Okay, so I think we answered this question. Should rights be granted to children at all once or gradually? 16 to drive, 18 to make the most personal decisions, 21 to drink, etc. I mean, yeah, there is a certain sense in which they should be gradual. I'm not sure if those are the gradations. I'm not sure what drinking is so late. You can do everything else except, God forbid, alcohol. But yeah, it's not that they're granted. It's that they're, the parents' role changes.
Yeah,
right?
And it's when from the point of view of the law, you're viewed as capable of exercising your rights. And it's like an 8-year-old that says, I want to live alone. Or it's no. Okay, you might be upset with your parents or whatever, but you're not capable of making a decision about that. But at 16 that they want to leave home and so on, then it's, yeah, you're capable, or 18, but they have to set that now you're the one exercising your rights, not someone else is in effect the custodian for you.
And even then, I think this needs to be an age. And then if you want to do something before that age, like leave your parents, go live alone, you should be able to go in front of a judge and prove that you're an adult, or make the argument that you're an adult and let them decide. So again, the state's job is, in a sense, to be kind of an objective arbiter when there is a conflict between the child and the parents. So Emmett, I think, calls me on something that I said earlier, which I think he's right. He says, should a man who doesn't want a child, be forced into an 18-year commitment. If the woman decides to have the baby, should there be a contractual way to handle this case? Yes, absolutely. I misspoke earlier when I said the man, it was in the other context. But yes, I don't think a man should be forced to support a child just because they conceived them. If they would have wanted if they wanted the woman to have an abortion and she wanted to carry it to term. So I don't think that obligates you to take care of the child if you didn't choose that obligation.
I think it's complicated because it's part of what, from the point of view of what government is doing, is that the parents have a responsibility, and if it is that it's the biological father doesn't want to have the child, so then it has to be really clear. Okay, now full responsibilities falling on the woman's shoulders if she chooses to bring the child.
And I think it's different if they're married. There's a certain presumption about if they're married or not. And so there's some legal complexity that would have to be ironed out in order to clarify all that, so we don't get into situations where fathers just leave and abandon their responsibility when they have taken on their responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay, two other abortion questions. Frank, this is more a statement. A fetus is a potential person who will become a one-of-a-kind individual who has never existed before and never will again. There's only one me. And I think the key term there, Frank, is potential. And if that potential is not realized, then they're not a person. And they never will, and they don't become. Yeah. So, and that's up for the mother to make that decision. Let's see. I feel this issue of abortion in the general public is based upon the false dichotomy of intrinsicism versus subjectivism. Both sides defy the other. This is why objectivism is unique. It gives you a third correct alternative.
Yeah, and that's part of the defense of the pro-abortion is too much subjective. To say it's just, well, a woman should be able to choose. You can't just choose anything. And part of what the other side is saying is you're choosing murder. And you have to be able to answer that, not just say, yeah, I should be able to choose and I want to choose murder, I can choose. No, that you have to argue that it's not murder and why it's not, that it's a potential and not an actual. So, yep. And if you don't engage on that level, then all you have is one side spewing dogma and the other side saying, I should be able to choose whatever I want.
I don't feel like your dogma.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pivot to nihilism or nihilism. So what is nihilism?
So I think when it's used, it's nihil, it's the zero, it's destruction. It's destruction for the sake of destruction. And Ayn Rand has I think a unique and deeply insightful view of what that means. So I think the equivalent, she once in a while uses nihilist but the formulation she uses, at least from Atlas Shrugged onward, is hatred of the good for being the good. And I think that's her account of what in sort of 20th century modern world it's put as nihilism. And so it's a response to value. So hatred of the good for being the good. It's that the person in some sense, either more consciously, explicitly, or more subconsciously, views the thing in question, the thing or phenomenon, as good, as representing a value. And rather than the response being, okay, this is something I want, I should go after, I should respect, I should admire, the response is hatred. And this is something to destroy because it's good, because it's a value. And I mean, her generic definition of value is that which one acts to gain or keep. And normally if your reaction to a value or thinking of something as good is, I want it, give me some of that, give me more of that. And here it's the response is the reverse. It's good, therefore I need to destroy it.
And so where does that come from? I mean, is there a, I mean, there's no philosophy of nihilism. It seems more psychological than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think she thinks its root is psychological. Now, I do think there's a philosophy of nihilism, which we can talk about in a moment, but she thinks of the philosophy, and I think this is right, she thinks of it as rationalization for the motive. So it's primarily an issue of motive. What's driving? What is the person after? And he wants to destroy a value because he thinks it's a value. And then you can dress that up and rationalize it. And she says, like, it's so, she views this as subhuman. And in one of the essays, she talks about these creatures. And in contrast, like, to evil people, like a criminal is, he sees $1 million and I don't want to work for it, but I still want it. It's not like I'm just going to burn it all. I want to get it. He's going to get it by completely illegitimate means. And she says, like, this, in comparison to the nihilist, this is still a human reaction. The nihilist he sees $1 million and wants to light it on fire. It's not that and that's not a criminal. That's below a criminal. So she thinks of it as, in terms of a motive, and it's the form of evil. It's the lowest motive you can have, and so it's hard for a person to even admit to himself that that's his motive, and that's the need for rationalizations. Then,
and and the psychology here is kind of a hatred of life, of reality, of the world, of everything.
So the essay in which she talks most about this. Now, there's a lot in Atlas Shrugged. So the villains are driven by hatred of the good for being the good. And that comes out in the story. So the two things to read if you want her perspective on this is Atlas Shrugged, and pay attention to the villains and what they do, what's driving them, the way they rationalize what is driving them, and how and why those rationalizations are exposed by the end of the story. So this is a major aspect of Atlas Shrugged. And then she wrote an essay, and the title is important. It's Age of Envy. And this is written in the early 1970s. And she thinks the cultural atmosphere is saturated with hatred of the good for being the good, or nihilism. And she brings up many forms in there. And there she talks about how she thinks psychologically this comes about, that someone could have this as one motive among many, and then as a dominant motive that is sort of, you can talk about a person as he's essentially a nihilist, not just he has a nihilistic element in him. And she thinks of it as it's a default on taking responsibility for your mind and your life. And for her, taking responsibility means exercising your rational faculty. And exercising here means like really developing it. It's functioning at a conceptual, principled level. And when she calls it an anti-conceptual mentality, that there's people who rebel against the need to take full responsibility. But full responsibility is not like get a job. She means it's at a very deep level of taking responsibility for your life. And when you don't do that, all kinds of things go wrong in a person. And the worst thing that can happen is that your response to values, which in a sense you've forsaken, because you've forsaken your means to reach values. You've forsaken rational life, rational effort. That's the only way to reach values. And to sort of justify that, the worst form is to have a reverse view of values, and to rather than have a love for values, is to have a hatred for that. But she has a complex view of how this arises in a person.
In what book is The Age of Envy?
It used to be called The New Left, The Anti-Industrial Revolution. It's now, there's some additional essays in it. It's The Return of the Primitive. But there's two, so she talks, and this is relevant for thinking of, the title is The Age of Envy. she also writes about the rise of tribalism. So I don't think she would be surprised by our cultural.
Yep.
She'd be disappointed in that America has come to this, but that we're increasingly tribal. She was talking about in the 70s, and she thinks that's the anti-conceptual mentality as well.
Mm-hmm.
So she has a series of essays in the 70s where she's talking about the anti-conceptual mentality and what it results in. And what's more prominent is tribalism. But I think she thinks the worst form of that is it becomes hatred of the good for being the good.
And how does her definition of or definition of nihilism compare to kind of the standard definition in the culture?
So I put it something like destruction for destruction's sake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's more typical when people think of it. It's nihilism that doesn't accomplish anything. Like it's not, we need to tear this down to build something better, build something new. So we got to tear this down as an end in itself. Mm-hmm. So I think that's how it's, and there is such a phenomenon, and people are right to, like, there's people who all they're about is burning things, tearing down. They don't have any positive message, positive vision, but they seem really animated. So it's like they want to destroy for the sake of destruction. I think what her perspective adds is the psychology about this, but it adds the value perspective that there's what's happening is it's the opposite response to values than what's the norm. And this is why it's so hard to fathom and so shocking. It's like, even if you disagree about values, it's if you view something as a value, doesn't everybody think, okay, then go and get it and you want it. And here it's something that it simultaneously identifies it as a value and wants to destroy it.
Mm-hmm. So what are the philosophies that justify or provide justification for nihilism?
Yeah, so
rationalization.
She called Immanuel Kant the most evil person in history.
Yep.
And I think one way to understand that is she views him as a nihilist. So he's after destruction for the sake of destruction, but now more deeply, he's able to understand what is valuable and wants to destroy it. And he writes a whole philosophy that makes this seem rational and moral to do. And her view is like, this can't be done innocently. You can't have a philosophy that is so single-mindedly destructive and think it was an honest error, that he just got it wrong. I mean, he was really trying, but unfortunately got it wrong. So she views it as his system, as a system of rationalization. And if you think of what the Kantian viewpoint is, it's reasons cut off from reality. It's unable to know anything about reality, but that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So it's not like, for someone like Hume, it's a real problem. We want to be able to understand reality. Our whole life depends on being in it. And if induction doesn't work, and you can't even know if there's cause and effect, and you can't even really know if there's a world outside of you, this is a big problem.
Yeah.
For Kant, it's not a problem. It's just, that's the way you're cut off. Don't think you know anything about, he'll call it the noumenal world. And then in morality is not for the sake of anything. You don't achieve an afterlife. He's adamant that it's not about the pursuit of happiness. That whole enlightenment thing, that's all wrong. It's not morality if you're doing it because you want to gain and so on. It's duty for the sake of duty, which means the colloquial way to put it, but Kant's way worse than that, is virtue for the sake of virtue. Like, why do it? You're supposed to do it. And so there's nothing positive. There's no positive vision in Kant. And one way to think about it, he's Plato without any positive vision. So Plato thought, you can't know this world and stop trying to orient yourself to another world. And what reason, the philosopher kings, what they do when they're really thinking and so on, is they're oriented to another world, not this world. So, and morality is about this kind of dedication as well, but it accomplishes something. And it accomplishes something Plato, I think, even thinks in this world, but certainly it prepares you for the next world. And you'll be, if you lead a proper life, you'll be sort of united with the forms. And so it's mystical, but it's positive. And Kant takes all that away and says, yeah, no, you're cut off from reality. And there's no higher reality that you're going to reason reaches or so on. And morality, yeah, no, you don't gain from morality, but you still have to do it.
Yep. Why do you think he has such universal appeal? I mean, people defend him, and he had this massive amount of influence.
I think the essential reason, well, there's two. So he unleashes the bad people. So part of the appeal comes from he unleashes a torrent of irrationalism and of smashing. So if you think of 19th century as a great century in terms of human prosperity, but when you think of philosophically, 19th century is a disaster. And what it unleashes is a whole torrent of emotionalists. We don't have to go by reason anymore. We know reason doesn't work. It doesn't achieve any. You don't get any knowledge. Don't tell us we have to go by reason. We can go by our emotions. So this is so explicit in 19th century, particularly continental philosophy, but 19th century philosophy as a whole. We're freed from the straitjacket of reason. And it unleashes that kind of person. So there's an appeal to the people who want to smash. And this is why she viewed him as so evil. It's not just that he's rationalizing hatred of values. He's giving people and a whole culture the ability to rationalize this. And that empowers the bad people and disempowers the good people. And I think that's what she thinks happens in the 19th and 20th centuries. But so that's one aspect. And the other aspect is he exploits all kinds of vulnerabilities in the positive case for reason, for values, for freedom. This is the sense in which, or it's why I view Rand as she's one of the four major philosophers. Aristotle answers Plato, and nobody answered Kant until Ayn Rand. So he exploits things in the Enlightenment. I mean, as I said, already by Hume, you have the essential skepticism that we can't prove that reason works. We can't prove that it leads to knowledge. We can't prove induction, or we can't validate it. We can't even validate that there's cause and effect. Yeah, all our science relies on this, but we don't really know that there is cause and effect.
And we can validate morality, the morality of pursuit of happiness. We have no way to connect that to reality. Yeah.
And their justification sort of is appeal to God, as we're talking about rights. And Kant brings in, that's all mystical. So don't think this is rational. Don't think you're based on reason when you do this.
So let's see. So we have one question on nihilism. Do nihilists use altruism to achieve destruction, but they themselves never believed in the altruism ideal? Or are they nihilists? Are many nihilists former altruists who recognize that utopia is impossible and begin to resent existence and to wage war against it?
I mean, I think the leading crusaders for altruism there's a nihilistic element. It's about destruction. It's about so another way you could put it, destruction for the sake of destruction. If you put it in morality, as we were talking about earlier, it's sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. It's sacrifice that doesn't accomplish anything, doesn't gain anything. It's completely unintelligible. Like if you ask, just of thinking about religion, because I think religion, and especially Christianity, coming after ancient Greece and Rome, has a significant element of nihilism in it. That is, they were about the destruction of ancient Greece and Rome and the thinkers and the thinking and the philosophy of ancient Greece and Rome. It was destruction, and not because they have something better. It was destruction to stamp out reason. And you find a lot in the Christians about this. And if you think of it, just the kind of mystical story that's presented, why does God need sacrifice? Yeah. He's omnipotent, all-knowing. He can't be affected by anything. What does he need me not to eat meat for, or not to engage in sex outside of marriage? Like, how does this accomplish anything? And it doesn't. Like, you can't make any sense that you're achieving anything. You can make sense that you're losing.
It's very explicit in the book of Job. I mean, Job, God, in order to test Job, kills his entire family, destroys his livelihood, destroys everything. And when Job complains, and he spends most of the book complaining to God about it, God basically says, who are you to even ask me any of these things? It's not, and only when Job accepts that,
right,
basically drops to his knees and accepts that he is nothing and nobody. And so if you think about it, God is the worst kind of tyrant who wants obedience for the sake of obedience, not for the sake of a goal, not for the sake of you being happy, and not for the sake of building some universe or whatever. He wants your obedience for the sake of obedience and nothing else. And he will randomly cause you damage just to test your obedience. Yeah. And this is part of the Bible. This is a book it's not like something that was written critiquing God. This is part of the Jewish Bible. And so once Job, of course, says, yes, I accept all that, God gives him another wife and other kids and replaces all that. It's just, it's somebody says sadistic. Jennifer says sadistic, absolutely sadistic.
Yeah. And so going back to the question, there's a difference between a follower of Christianity, and particularly when you get into the dark and Middle Ages, when they never hear of any other viewpoint, of saying, like, okay, this doesn't really make any sense to me, but I can't live with it. I can't live without it because I don't know any other way to live, and so on. So I sort of have to try to make some kind of compromise and peace and live my life sort of Christian, sort of not, and so on. That's very different than someone who preaches this, who makes their life that I'm going to preach this, that is this, I mean, I was going to put it, it's nonsense, but it's way worse than nonsense. This stuff that incapacitates people's minds and just is commanding them to sacrifice for no reason. Like, if you're preaching that, that's very different than someone who sort of accepts it, can't envision an alternative, and sort of tries to make some kind of terms with it and still live. And that's the sense. So for altruism more broadly, that there can be people like that, but the person pushing that what morality is about you don't count, your life doesn't count, don't be selfish, it's about other people, give to them, and so that's very different than the person who, all I've heard all my life is altruism, so something like it must be true, and so on, and I can't really live with it, but I'm not going to live without it because then I'll be completely immoral, and so I'll try to do something, and that's not a nihilist. And it's not even a nihilistic element even in the person.
So in terms of nihilism in the world today, where do you see it?
Yeah, so this is, unfortunately, you see it all over the place. Yeah. And many of these come up in Ayn Rand's writing because she was very concerned. I mean, as I said, she wrote an essay that's titled The Age of Envy. So she thought this is starting to engulf and saturate the culture. Modern art, I think of as it's nihilistic. It is not. So when the Romanticism in the 19th century comes and they're smashing all kinds of forms, it's the classical form, and a symphony has to have 4 movements and it has to go like this and this. And so they said, no, it's like we're getting rid of this. But they had something better. It's not we're just smashing this. When you get to modern art and they're saying, I mean, in music, we're doing away with melody and harmony and so, and what they substitute is noise. I was in a concert once, and we talked about this before, that they do this deliberately. They play one 18th or 19th century piece and then a modern piece and then an 18th, because they want you to sit through and not leave, not like show up late or leave early.
Yeah.
So they put it in the middle. And it was hammering off stage. And I literally thought, like, are they doing construction? And then I realized it's the piece. Yeah. And I started laughing in the step. I mean, and people looked at me like, oh my God, like, how dare you laugh at this great thing? And that's nihilism. This is taking somebody, like, hammering in their garage and saying, this is the equivalent of Beethoven. And nobody thinks that. Yeah. And you couldn't possibly, it's like a love for embryo. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as someone who loves to listen to hammering. Yep. Or a jackhammer or something like that. But to elevate it, all that is the destruction of the value. It's not, okay, we've got something better. And so there, you can engage in destruction if you think it's something that should be destroyed and you're going to replace it with something better. But when it's your whole response is, no, what I'm after is destroying the value. And notice it's again, so this is part of Ayn Rand's insight. They view Beethoven's music as valuable. Yes. It's not that they think, don't listen to Beethoven, just listen to hammering or what. It's what they want to do is equate the two. And all that does is, like, nobody listens to jackhammering, but all it's like, oh, Beethoven's as good as jackhammering. Oh, so he's as bad as jackhammering. I mean, and that's just the destruction of the value. So they identify it as a value. And instead of cherishing it, what they want to do is tear it down.
Is multiculturalism a form of nihilism in the sense that it's trying to tear down Western civilization?
Yeah. And so multiculturalism, and this happens, I think, with many forms. So this happens even with modern art. Yeah. So there's one thing, so people say, but I like some modern art. And yeah, you can like it like wallpaper. Yeah. And in effect, that's the way the person's treating it. He puts it up like he would put up wallpaper on his wall. And that, then it's like, isn't there some value here? Yes, but that's not what the modern art movement is doing. They're not saying this is like wallpaper, and here we've come up with some new designs of wallpaper. They're saying this is like Beethoven, or this is like a Vermeer. And that's the destruction. So it's the same in multiculturalism. If what it means is you should know some things more than just your culture, and that there's some valuable things in other culture. Yes, that's true. What it means is all cultures are equal and equally deserving of study, respect, admiration, that's monstrous. Because it's just not true. And if you ask the person, like, would you want to live just in any, like, every culture is as good as any other. You want to live in Nazi Germany, the Dark Ages, the Congo, or 19th century America, it's all the same. Yep. Well, it's obviously not all the same. So, and and again, you're not elevating something. All you're doing is tearing down. So more broadly, egalitarianism. And this is one of the things, and she saw early in the 70s when it was starting to become something, and everyone, it's not even right that everyone, she noticed in the papers and in academia the way that Rawls' theory of justice was being talked about, and she said, this is the next thing that is going, and you're going to be 20, 30 years from now, there's going to be a whole literature about a theory of justice. It's going to take you 5 lifetimes to study it. Any argument you make against it, they're going to say, well, have you read book such and such and the footnote on page 187 and so, and you don't know what you're talking about if you haven't. And it's going to be this whole massive way of destroying values. She saw that early in the 70s, and I think she was right about egalitarianism. And the idea that everything is equal, regardless of what in fact people's abilities are, what their talents are, what their virtues are, what their level of productivity is, their intelligence, all that. The only result of doing that is you can't elevate the person into a Michael Jordan, but you can make everybody my level of basketball. Yep. And it's designed to tear down.
So really, I mean, there's so much in our culture today that's nihilistic because almost all modern ideas seem to be about tearing stuff down. There's, I mean, postmodernism, critical race theory.
Yeah.
It's nothing is about elevating. It's all about destruction.
And she put environmentalism into this. I mean, so the book what we're talking about, The Age of Envy, was in the original title. The New Left, the Anti-Industrial Revolution. That what it's about is destroying the industrial revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries and destroying one of the, if not the greatest achievement of mankind. It's, no, we need to go back to a pre-industrial civilization. Mm-hmm. That this is it's monstrous to have this view. So I think her whole view of the left, of what happens, is the old left had rationalizations that people, and even sometimes they sort of half believed, but half believed is important, that, oh no, like communism's going to outstrip capitalism. Yeah. Russia's going to have better factories, more electricity. Look, they can put someone into space and so on. They're going to outstrip the West economically, culturally, morally. And then when they're faced after World War II with the real meaning of collectivism, and that what it has done is killed people in the millions, mm-hmm. they have a real choice to either rethink their fundamental convictions and their collectivism, or to now embrace, yeah, okay, no, this doesn't achieve anything positive, but we still want it. Yep. And her view is what they did is that the second, it's no, collectivism is right, altruism is right. And so what the problem is values, because these things don't lead to values. So the problem is you want values. No, you should not. You should not want industrial civilization. You should not want great art. You should not want a great culture. Yep. You should be tearing these things down. And so the new left for her, I think, is nihilistic in a way the old left was partly, but rationalized, and this is why people accepted it, that it didn't seem nihilistic.
I mean, there's a real sense in which Christianity and Marxism are similar in the sense that both offer afterlife, right? So in Christianity, your life doesn't matter, but there's a heaven, so don't worry about it. In Marx, there is the utopia. Yeah. And Marx is very clear. In the utopia, everybody's happy. Everybody's pursuing their own values. They're artists, and they're doing their own thing. There's freedom in the utopia. It just takes a lot of sacrifice in order to get there. And what the new left and all these and what Kant really does, they eliminate any afterlife. It's suffering for the sake of suffering. It's destruction for the sake of destruction. And that's why I always say Marx is a good guy as comparison to some of these bastards. Now, of course, the nihilism is implicit in Marx. It's there for the taking, but at least he has the decency to offer some idealized version of the future where these people don't.
And to say that the nihilism is there, but sort of rationalized, disguised, but as Ayn Rand insists, it's partly disguised in their own eyes, though you can't fully do it, is that both the utopias are completely mystical. There's not one explanation in Christianity. Where is heaven? How does it work? It's all negation. Yep. It's not in this realm or in this world. It's non-causal. It's infinite. It's not governed by identity. It's somehow you don't have to do anything, but you're going to prosper. And so it's all negation. It's just, all they tell you is it's not like anything you know. And the same with Marx's utopia. How is this going to work? Oh, no, the state's going to wither away, and then it's going to be, and if you ask how, no, just wait for it.
It just happens. Yep.
Yeah.
There's no explanation. I mean, it's the one part of his book that just goes like that. Very fast, a lot of hand waving. It's complete mysticism.
And that's when you know that what's driving it really, even if they don't fully know this, it's the destruction, it's the sacrifice. It's not the end result, because they're not interested in the end result and have no idea how it would come about.
Yeah. So there's obviously a huge amount of nihilism on the left today. Do you see nihilism on the right?
Yeah, and so did Ayn Rand. And I think this
again, we're using left and right conventionally in a sense that it's the political spectrum. Right does not here represent individual rights or individualism or,
Yeah, and it's sort of it's the political cultural faction that's responding to the left, if you think of the right like that. So it's not ideological exactly. It's rather, we're supposedly the people who oppose this. And you see this in Rand's writing in the 70s, that part of her writing about hatred of the good for being the good, of what we're putting as, like, this is her account of what nihilism is she thinks it's deeply philosophical. So it's way bigger than politics. And philosophical issues affect all the factions. So her account of the new left is it's more and more hatred of the good for being the good. But her view of the faction that's labeled the right is they too are absorbing this. Mm-hmm. And so she puts she calls them the hippies of the right, the libertarians at the time. She views their embrace of anarchism as nihilism. We want to smash government. And we don't have what are we going to put in its place? Oh, no, people are just going to do whatever they want and so on. But what we want to do is tear down. And particularly if what you want to tear down is the United States of America, this form of government, the best form of government that has ever been achieved. Mm-hmm. We could still get to a better form of government, but this is the best that's ever been achieved. And this is what you want to tear down. And you have no explanation of what you're going to put in its place. It's just somehow everything's, this was her view, like anarchism used to be on the left. This was Marx's view of the socialists everything is just withers away, state withers away, and somehow you've got Shangri-La. And now the libertarians embrace this. And she thought it's perverse intellectually, but in terms of motive, this is nihilism seeping into the secular elements of the people who think they're opposed to the new left. And then she saw it on the religious aspect of it. So abortion is one. Her view, I think, is pretty clear that she thinks the motivation for this is to penalize, as we were talking about, to penalize people for the pursuit of happiness, of enjoying sex as an end in itself, of viewing their life, their pleasure, enjoyment of it as an end in itself. That abortion is a way of just trying to undermine, destroy that value, and not for the sake of it. There's no actual human being who benefits from it. Yep. And the idea that you love this embryo and something, that's she views as rationalization and smokescreen. So that's one. And more broadly, the embrace of the moral majority that the right and with Reagan did was, and abortion was central to that. But she brings in another thing that was central to it, of creationism. Yep. The pushing of, we're going to equate evolution and creationism. And we want both of these taught in the schools and so on. One is science, rationality, and one is make-believe. And the idea that, these aren't part, it's like modern art. It's like putting beside Beethoven a trash can and saying, no, we want both of these in the museum. Her view was like, this is nihilism. This is the destruction. Darwin is one of the great human achievements, I think, that to transform the whole way we look at life and to make possible all kinds of advances in biology, medicine, and so on, because we look at it now from an evolutionary perspective and so on. And to say this is as good as some shepherds roaming around 2,500 years ago, writing some stuff down about how things work, and we want both of these taught. Her view is this is destruction for the sake of destruction.
I always say, people ask, why is Silicon Valley so leftist? And I always say, can you imagine a group of brilliant entrepreneurs, engineers, people who take science seriously, people who take human knowledge seriously, who want to improve the world? Can you imagine them taking seriously a political party that believes that evolution, it's just kind of a theory, right? And denigrates the whole idea of evolution. And that's what Reagan did by bringing the moral majority in the Republican Party. They associated capitalism with this barbarism, with this completely ignorant view of the world, with this nihilism, and it turns off a huge number of people.
And the nihilism is important because people sense it, even if they can't give voice to it. So just like people, and I think rightly, think of some of the looting and rioting going on now, that it's destruction for the sake of destruction. And they wonder, like, why doesn't this turn everybody off? It should turn a normal, healthy person off. And it should. That it's when it's destruction for the sake of destruction that your response to values, and it's often, I mean, they're harming people who they're supposedly saying they're helping. I mean, it's hardworking shopkeepers and so on who they supposedly say they're because they're black and so are being oppressed, and you're smashing their stores, so that it's destruction of values because it's value. That people like in Silicon Valley, when I remember watching this was when Bush Jr., one of the debates in the Republican, and the question was, who believes in evolution? I view this like just asking that question as nihilism, as though this is an issue of belief. Like I decided not to.
And the answer was nobody.
Yeah, no, and nobody.
Single hand went up.
And you can't just view that as, oh, okay, they're a little religious. That a normal person, if they value science, will sense that there's a nihilism here, even if they can't give voice to it, and it will turn them off. Like it is, I can't have anything to do with this. So she saw it as rise, and I think rightly, she saw it as rising. I mean, this is part of when she said it's an age of envy. It's not like it's only the new left. It's maybe most pronounced in the new left, but it's all over our culture. I mean, another is antitrust, which is the Republicans brought into the original arguments aren't obviously hatred of the good for being the good, but she thinks if you look at the history of antitrust, it penalizes the best companies in America, IBM, Alcoa, and so on, and then Microsoft later, the best companies, because they're the best.
Yep.
And if you don't repeal this, even like if you mistakenly passed it and thought competition requires breaking up trust and so on, if when you see that what it does is smashes the best companies, then you're complicit in nihilism.
And it strikes me that right now, the Republicans are ready to launch a big antitrust campaign against big tech, but it's also this whole issue of so-called free speech on these on Twitter and Facebook is driven by the same kind of hatred and wanting to smash somebody who disagrees with you.
Yeah, and I think if you watch, I suspect you watched some of the hearings. I watched some of them.
Oh.
I think you see like they're oozing with hatred.
Yeah.
It's partly grandstanding, but not completely grandstanding.
Actually, there's a Democratic, I think she's a House member, who's making a reputation for herself by attacking drug company executives. And there's a whole series of videos of her with their little whiteboard doing these little exercises and how much money they make versus how many people die because.
Yeah, I watched that.
So my next show, the show after that is going to be just dedicated to her because what a horrible human being she is. And the lies, and she tells them in a way that I think a significant number of Americans can't see through. They can't get what's actually driving this.
Yeah. And the antitrust, I do think the Democrats are leading the push, but it's on both sides. So again, that nihilism is far deeper phenomenon. It's on both sides, and even in regard to the pharmaceutical company. I mean, you see Trump going in the debate after the pharmaceutical, and what we're doing is we're going to make that we buy the drugs for other countries that have violated.
Well, he's done it executive orders that are basically just, you couldn't differentiate them from what a Democrat would do in terms of trying to force drug companies to play by his rule book. No respect for markets and no respect for individual choice.
And if you think, putting it in terms of values, if the pandemic doesn't reinforce this for you, your response to the biotech world and to Silicon Valley should be like, these are phenomenal achievements, phenomenal values. What can we do to respect these, to make them, the people who have done this, prosper? Like, how can we at least get out of their way, if not thank them for it? Like, if you don't think of whether it's Facebook, Google, Zoom, and then all the companies working on vaccines, creating equipment, drugs to help treat COVID, if you don't view it as, okay, this is a value, and my response is not, how do I smash this? It's, how do I admire and express my admiration for this? That's like, this is why she thinks of it as it's a deep psychological, like, if your response when you see a value is not, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, it's, how can I stop this? There's something really, really deeply wrong.
So here's a question for Bree. Don't the nihilists want destruction so their useless efforts in life can seem special? This is a goal, even if an evil goal. Your definition would not include this as nihilism.
But that's not a positive.
Yeah, it's not a positive goal. It's still the same thing.
Yeah. So, and you see, it's one of the ways, and this is particularly emphasized in Atlas Shrugged, of thinking of what hatred of the good for being the good amounts to. It amounts to wanting the person's whim to rule. It's my whim, whatever my whim happens to be, that reality should fall into line. And it doesn't. And part of, you have sort of face two options. You can then say, okay, there's something really wrong with the way I'm functioning, and try to correct that. Or you say there's something wrong with reality, and down with reality. And that, the nihilism, like, that's an aspect. It's down with reality. And one of the ways Ayn Rand puts it, and then down with its best representative, which is the man of reason, the man of intelligence, the man of ability. So there is an element that you can think of it as they're trying to protect their pseudo self-esteem. But it's all negative. It's not to achieve anything. There's no real goal there. It's another ways that you put it, it's the reification of a zero. Mm-hmm. It's just, I want to be a zero, and why can't I be?
All right, let's see a few questions and then we'll call it a night. Do professors teach Kant incorrectly and make students think Kant believed in reason and try to get rid of religious morality? There's a short video on YouTube making that claim and other seemingly rational ideas.
Yeah, I mean, this is a deep divide in Kantian scholarship about what was Kant really about and how to understand his philosophy. And this goes to the issue we talked about earlier about what makes people accept it. Philosophy is really difficult, and philosophy at the level that a Plato or an Aristotle or a Kant or an Ayn Rand are operating at is very difficult to understand. I had professors when I learned Kant who I think genuinely thought he's a defender of science. Now, I didn't think that, and indeed I wrote papers, and they, I mean, this is a whole debate. So it's not the professor thinks you're crazy if you write. No, what he's doing is trying to undermine and destroy science. But it's very difficult to understand what he's, like, the meaning of what he's doing, particularly if you don't have, there's a solution to all the problems he's cashing in on. But I think the solution you get from Ayn Rand, and if a person doesn't know that, they can think of it as, because he says he's defending science, I'm defending rationality, I'm critiquing only pure reason. Yeah. And I'm a champion of morality. So he presents it in one half as, no, I'm saying, yeah, science is all valid. It just doesn't know anything about reality.
Yep.
And if you take what's important as, he said, no, he's saying science works. If that's what you take as important, you think he's pro-science. If you take as important, he says, yeah, it has nothing to do with reality. If you take that as the essence, which it is, then you don't see him as a defender of science.
Let's see. What do you think? Why do you think most people care more about not being wrong rather than finding out what the actual truth is?
I mean, that's a deep motivational issue. And the more tribal, I mean, part of what it means for the culture to become more tribal is you no longer think of yourself as even capable of reaching the truth. And so this again is partly the Kantian influence. So Kant he's the father of everything bad in the modern world, including tribalism. And the more you think of it, like I can't know reality, then it's how am I going to function if I can't know reality? And it's not even possible to know it. I've got to look for some group that's going to protect me and then I can be comfortable in and so on. And what disturbs that is others. That the whole framework becomes not who has the truth and who doesn't. It's your gang against my gang. You get to that perspective only if you think you're incapable of reaching the truth. And I think so it's today, yes, there's many people who are there's not even really much of a pretense anymore. This is part of what it means to be tribal. It's my guy says this and therefore it's right. And if your guy said the same thing, it'd be wrong because your guy's saying it. There's no interest in the truth, but to get that at a cultural level, people have to be more and more convinced that it's impossible to reach the truth.
So here's a related question, although I think the premise is wrong. Why is racial collectivism less successful at rallying people than class and nation-based collectivism?
I'm not sure it's less successful.
Yeah. And but maybe it is later because it's being discredited and was discredited during the post-slavery and then after the civil rights movement. So it became bad to be a racist, even though people still held on to it.
I'd say that there are more sophisticated and more primitive forms of collectivism. And Ayn Rand's view, which I think is right, is that racism is the most primitive form, but because it's completely irrelevant factors. It's a person's skin color. That's supposedly what determines everything. And if you have any life experience, it doesn't determine anything. Yeah. So in that sense, to think what's essential about people is their skin colors are very, very primitive. And it's more intellectual, more sophisticated, and there's seemingly an element of choice it's about the economic class that you're in. And you can move classes a little bit. You can become and identify that it's the working class who's exploited. And so it's more sophisticated to think of it that like that's what's driving things. And economics does, and in comparison to skin color, economics has causal influence and impact. Skin color doesn't. But the tendency is to look for groups that are not ideological, because if you're unable to think and unable to know the truth, you can't figure out all these sophisticated things. Like, is Marx's theory true? And is this more? The simplest, easiest thing is to have a pre-selected groups.
So, okay, last two questions. What is the effect of Christianity on moral judgment in principle and in practice? That's a big question, if they differ.
One aspect is to rail against judgment and to rail against justice. And this is particularly in Christianity, that judge not lest ye be judged. That injunction is it's so anti-life that you can't and shouldn't think of the people like who's rational, who's moral, who's honest, who has integrity, and who doesn't. And that you should treat the former as good and reward them, and treat the people who don't have integrity or dishonest, treat them as bad and punish them. No, mercy is better than justice. You should engage in forgiveness. And who are you in the end to judge? Leave it to God and so on. That is such a subversion of justice that Christianity takes special relish in undermining justice. That it's the opposite. As Ayn Rand put it, a rational attitude is judge and prepare to be judged. Mm-hmm. And you should, if you're a good person, you should want to be judged. Because if the other person's rational, he'll see that you're good.
Yep. So Corey, thanks for the idea for a show. It's a good idea. And let's see, this is the last one. Do you know if any of the Founding Fathers reference Kant as an influence? I mean, isn't Kant at the same, doesn't he really?
Yeah, he's writing at the same time. So I don't know offhand of a mention of Kant specifically. There's certainly mention of ideas that he's cashing in on.
Yep.
And so that morality is not about reason. It's about feeling and faith. You see Founding Father, including Jefferson, talking about these kinds of things. And that's the kind of view that Kant cements as there's no alternative to this. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, they're using ideas that are close to Kant's, but I don't know of direct reference.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brad Thompson in his book on the Declaration talks about the ideas of the South, you know, the slave owners, and that they were very influenced by German Romantic philosophy. That many of them were more Hegelian than Kantian, but Hegel was a Kantian. So in that sense, there's a direct influence of Kant on the progressive later on. But what was interesting, I didn't know, but on people like Calhoun and all the people in the South defending slavery at the time were very German in their intellectual roots, and actually huge critics of the Declaration of Independence and of the Constitution, and because they understood what it implied to their way of life, and they were seeking a philosophy to defend it, and they found it among the post-Kantian Germans. All right, great. Thanks, Onkar. This was fun.
Okay, yeah, it's fun.
No, we covered a lot.
Yeah.
And we went 2 hours. All right. Thanks, Onkar. Thank you all. Thanks for everybody who used the super chat to support the show. I very much appreciate that. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. It helps the algorithm if you press like. Don't forget to share the show, and you can support the show not only through super chat, but also on yaronbrookshow.com/support, on Patreon, Subscribestar, Locals, pretty much anywhere you want. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Onkar.
Thanks.
Have a great night. Bye.